The Projection Booth podcast is sponsored by Scarecrow Video. Try out Scarecrow's rent-by-mail service. Choose from over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Visit scarecrow.com today.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Comment vous êtes fait ça?
Je suis tombée sur des éléments métalliques dans un chantier à outil, je pense.
Enfin, ça vient pas d'être fait, ça a au moins 3 ou 4 heures. Pourquoi vous avez traîné comme ça?
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a?
T'as la moitié de la jambe arrachée, tu t'en rends pas compte, elle lâche tes fleurs, tu te retournes, tu te grattes, alors...
On a regardé partout dans la chambre, on a trouvé un truc bizarre, il y avait du sang sur le sol dans la salle de bain. On avait peur de tomber sur un cadavre.
Après, j'ai été m'entailler dans le débarras près des archives. Comment tu t'es entaillé? Avec un truc en fer. J'ai compris, mais qu'est-ce que tu faisais avec ce truc en fer? Je m'entaillais. J'ai perdu le contrôle, je suis tombée.
T'es incapable de me donner une explication cohérente? Montre ta main. Ouais, dépêche-toi. Ah, mais d'où ça t'est venu une idée pareille? De quoi t'avais envie de ça?
C'est pas possible, c'est pas toi qui as fait ça. Je t'ai dit, j'ai eu envie. J'ai pas réfléchi, je sais pas pourquoi, j'ai fait une connerie, je la referai pas.
Non, mais je m'en fous de ce que tu comptes faire ou pas. Tu l'avais prévu, ça?
En fait, ça t'a pris comme ça va pas recommencer. Puis sinon, tu peux voir un médecin et prendre un médicament.
Première fois que je vois ça.
Sauf qu'avec ces blessures, il risque de t'envoyer à l'hôpital psychiatrique.
Ça veut dire que t'as des préoccupations que je connais pas et que je te connais pas.
Bah si, tu me connais. Bah si, tu me connais.
C'est insupportable pour moi de voir ça.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Axel Kohagen.
Stopping in for a nibble.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Ben Buckingham.
Salutations.
We continue Shocktober with a look at In My Skin. Released in 2002, the film was written, directed by, and stars Marina Devon as Esther, a marketing exec who injures her leg while wandering off from a party. She becomes fascinated by the wound, and this begins the story of how Esther forms a new relationship with her own body. We will be spoiling all the gory details as we go along, so if you don't want anything ruined, please track down the movie and watch it before continuing. Just hit pause and we'll just be waiting, trapped like flies in amber. Axel, when was the first time you saw In My Skin, and what did you think?
This is the first time I've seen it. I went through a huge new French Extremity kick as soon as I watched my first film, which probably would have been Martyrs or High Tension. I needed to see everything within the genre. It really struck me. It's a singular, amazing film style, like the J-horror films or, American cult movies from the 70s and 80s. It's just this perfect time period, but I don't think I came across In My Skin until preparing for this. And my first response is that even though it has so many hallmarks and is definitely indicative of the new French Extremity, in a lot of ways, it's also a very straightforward film, does not pull a lot of punches. And I think director has kind of downplayed heavy symbolism, and I actually agree with her that this is a straightforward film about a woman's discovery of her body.
And Ben, how about yourself?
It was 2017 that I first, and the only time I've seen it until recently. I have a kind of funny relationship with this film. I laughed when you contacted me and said, "Hey Ben, I want you to do In My Skin." because you're the second person to stick this film in front of me. When I ran bar room film night way back when, one of my co-hosts along the way picked In My Skin to play. It was a film I'd come across in reading bits and pieces, but hadn't actually seen. And it was a curious pick for our night. We definitely played some pretty intense, heavy, messed up films. So we weren't playing it safe a lot of the time, but not exactly the kind of film you go and have a couple of beers and then sit down in the band room in ancient couches and soak up with a group of people. At the end of it, even I was a bit like, hey, Liam, interesting choice. He's like, I thought you'd appreciate it. I'm like, yeah, I did. But also, so once again, it was like, yeah, okay, Mike. Yep, I appreciated it.
You're my cannibal go-to guy.
I am the go-to cannibal guy, which is why this film has been put in front of me twice now. It is a film that I think like I went, yep, okay, and parceled it away and knew that one day it would return and hadn't thought much about it until now when it suddenly seems to be exploding back into attention, getting a couple of Blu-ray releases around the world. And I'm very happy to return to re-examine it. And I definitely am much more impressed by it. It's not that I wasn't impressed by it when I first saw it, but I don't think it is an easy film to absorb on a single viewing. And I think that watching it quietly in the dark on your own at least once, not all the time, but at least once, is definitely the way to really follow the experience.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the first time that I saw this film because I am not a big fan of the French Extremity films. I walked out of High Tension before their big twist was revealed. I talked about that on our Martyrs episode. We did an episode on Martyrs, and I don't think that went over well with at least one of my co-hosts on that one. But I do remember liking this film, and I do remember enjoying that this was such a look at a woman and her relationship with her own body. And by the way, how great is it that we have 3 dudes on this episode here to explain to women exactly what this film is about and to really mansplain all of the things that they experience and go through. I mean, we can talk about all kinds of bodily trauma and rape and menstrual anxiety and all those things, and just really give the girls a heads up on what it means to be a woman. So yay us.
I think I had watched it twice in preparation for this, and I had notes, and I kind of had some ideas of what I was going to say. And then I listened to Faculty of Horror's excellent podcast on this film and thought, well, shit, this is covering a lot of the stuff from a feminine perspective. I'm going to have to push it a little bit harder. I see this as a challenge for us to rise to while acknowledging, our identities and possible limitations.
And next week when we talk about Raw, we'll have 2 female co-hosts and then me to explain to them what things are going on. So it's easier here when we have 3 guys.
That's called balance, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Fair and balanced.
Also, we can see who has the worst French pronunciation as well. The Australian accent is not one that mixes with French very easily, and I did not get a chance to look up any pronunciation, so I'm just going to apologize right now.
I'm going to do my best to avoid French at all costs. That's why I didn't say this was called dans ma peau, or however you
say it. That's the easy one. You got to say that as many times as possible, because that's the easy one and get the points up. Dans ma peau.
Well, it looks like dans ma peau, which I know is definitely not it, as in Pepe Le Pew.
It was only in preparing for this podcast that I learned his name is pronounced Gaspar Noé and not Gaspar Noah. It kind of changed everything for me.
Yeah, I was looking up Rabulus, or no, I've already forgotten it. Rabulais. That's the one that I looked up. I'm like, I know it's not Rabulus. That shows you where I was disappearing into some strange places. I had to listen to the Faculty of Horror episode as well, and it was good because my brain wasn't particularly going in those directions. I had other weird things to look up, and I got distracted by all of the piles of books that I have and didn't get around to looking up the pronunciations. But Yeah, there is a lot of ways to approach this film. In our defense, while obviously this is a film dealing with a lot of feminist issues, it's a lot of just general societal, mental health, community, connections, modernity, all sorts of things that I think are much more widespread. It's just that we don't tend to get a film that so specifically hones in on a woman's experience, and especially a woman who isn't afraid of being and I mean this extremely positively, a weird little goblin freak.
Yeah, as I was watching this, I was making a list of all the oppositions that happen in this film, the idea of inside, outside, negative, positive, and I'm going to be focusing on these opening credits quite a bit, just a warning. Work and personal, woman, man, public, private, beauty, ugliness, and then person, body, and even in the credits, Dans ma peau is split between that M and the A. And these opening credits, like I don't focus on the credits nearly as much, but with this film, the whole idea of these negative and positive images, and that sometimes it looks like it's the same image on the left, which is positive, versus the image on the right, which is negative. Sometimes they are the same, very similar, and sometimes they are complete opposites. And you even get the split of the image when it comes to first times that we see our main character, when we get that amazing shot of her leg, and her leg is such the focus of so much of this film. And you have the chair on the left hand side, the leg on the right, and it almost looks like an architectural sculpture rather than a person, and that kind of disassociation, which we'll also be talking quite a bit about. And then you get the split screen comes back a few times, especially in what I would consider the opening to the third act, because this movie goes along pretty normal, a narrative path through the first and second act quite a bit. And then when it comes to the third act, it's still of a piece, but it goes off in a different direction and is handled and is shot in a little bit of a different way. And I did find it fascinating to find out that the cinematographer of this film also has a very successful business shooting food. And the food in this film is so unappetizing, especially when you get a shift. I think that's more of the second act shift of the restaurant scene, because so much of this, I talked about how it's work and personal, and it's this whole idea of the societal expectations, this idea of our main character being this. It doesn't really matter what her job is, but she is in advertising, which I guess actually does matter, because advertising is all about presentation. It's all about the gloss. It's all about, you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle kind of thing, and this idea of her working at this marketing company and having all of these expectations thrust upon her, as far as it's not just the 9 to 5, it's the party afterwards. It's the dinner with clients. It's these things that you have to perform at, as well as the job. And those things are not necessarily, I mean, you can be a fucking fantastic writer, have a great mind for ad copy or imagery, but then having to perform at a social function when you are definitely not comfortable doing that, it is such a pain in the ass. And that doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, but when you are a woman, you have extra stuff put upon you, as far as, well, you have to be pretty, and you have to be pleasant, and you have to know how much you can talk versus not talk. Because Lord knows, if you are there with a male client, you have to defer to them, and you just have to be basically arm candy or eye candy for this person. Just be seen and not necessarily heard.
Yeah, I knew the order of my notes was going to drive me insane, but you just zigzagged through like 3/4 of the film there, Mike.
Oh yeah. No, we are going to be all over the place. We are not taking this narrative way at all. We are definitely going to be all over.
This film needs like hyperlinks on hyperlinks to go through everything. There's just to like duck back to the opening credit. I would describe it as a dynamic dichotomy, that it isn't entirely, as you said, reflections, splits, divisions. I did get a chance to check out a little bit of her commentary, and she said that she described that she wanted to start it like a normal film. I love the idea, like, oh yeah, we'll just start at normal and then go from there and drag you into something not. But what she meant by that was she wanted to do it in the American style of having the starting with the city and then moving in closer to the buildings and then the people and the person, but to do it in a way that was different, that was a bit more abstract and changing it up. The split screen does return later, and she said when it returns later that it is meant to represent the wound itself rather than showing it, which does make that opening title sequence extra interesting, that the city itself as a possible wound. I don't necessarily think that the split always means that in the film, but you can certainly read it as such, and it is deeply meaningful. She wanted to start with the city because you actually don't get much contextualizing geography or background throughout the film. It really stays honed in close to her, and so gets out of the way in that opening sequence. But it's not just the city, it's the office space, it's the office materials, it's objects, it's so many, you get a bit of her leg mixed in with these objects. It's quite a fascinating hypnotic experience that also feels like real sense memory of the noughties, the way it's kind of like the vibe of the film stock and the color choices. And there's a gentle piano, I think, to kind of ease us in. Like everything is just, it almost feels normal, except there's that destabilization with the split, and then the image is not necessarily being matched or unmatched in a easily classifiable way.
That the opening, to me, I see it as establishing the monotony and boredom of her world. It's giving us this. It's a split world, but I found it purposefully non-compelling in terms of showing us what she's going to have to break free. And then there's the shot of her leg, which, as I remembered it and as I noted down, it's kind of a Laura Mulvey gaze kind of thing, because I think that first shot, it kind of starts down near her foot or ankle and goes up to her thigh in a way that I see it as kind of that male gaze. And I see that as establishing in the beginning, this is not her body. It is there, and people are gazing upon her, and she is an object to be looked at. And I think that happens to contrast shots later on of her and the leg are more static, not that zoom in, not that like voyeurism. It's just, this has become her body and she has reclaimed it. And also, I may be reading too much into this, but I think it goes from moving over her leg. I think it cuts to a container of pens with scissors in it. And I thought that was a nice little touch.
Definitely inclined to agree that the things we are seeing are a boring world, because, all three of us don't look like the type of guys who would be especially thrilled to be in an office space all the time.
That's my life, is working in this office, yes.
I know in the commentary, Marina Devan says that she really wanted to establish that she had this professional life, that she had things places where she had a kind of meaning, a connection, that she wasn't somebody necessarily, she's not Jack in Fight Club already fractured and splintering loose to begin with. It's like things could be just fine. They could just continue on. She is on a track, and the track is very familiar and unexciting and not prone to flipping.
So glad you mentioned Fight Club, because the line,
self-improvement is masturbation. Now self-destruction.
This whole movie feels like self-destruction, but really coming to grips with yourself as far as feeling your body and knowing your body, because so much of this too, it feels like this disassociation between her and her body. We get the scene at the dinner, and again, jumping all over, but at that dinner scene where her arm is completely disconnected. It's not even her arm anymore. And when she is shown later, suckling on it, biting on it, sucking the blood. She says in that commentary, fucking fantastic commentary, and so nice to have for me a visual commentary, like hearing her, seeing the subtitles, watching the movie at the same time was really, really great. And to have her talking about how she shot it as to show that this arm isn't even hers, that it is so disconnected. And those scenes where she will, God, I wish I was this flexible still, where she'll take her foot and rub her foot over her face. And it's like, this is so unnatural to see the way that she is framing her own body, the way that she talks later on when she lays back and her leg is in front of her. And she's like, I shot this as if my leg were a lover coming to me. I'm like, wow, that's great that you are so conscious of this disassociation of your own body. But yeah, that arm on the table, and then to, I guess, almost like relieve stress at this dinner, the way she takes her arm later on, as part of her, but again, we don't see it connected necessarily, and just is stabbing her arm with the fork and with the knife. And well, it could be that plastic arm that you saw, but it's this whole idea of like, she's almost become a mannequin at that point with that arm and the watch on there. It almost seems like an object that she would have in a commercial or inside of a marketing copy, a print ad.
I did briefly pick up my copy of The Sexual Politics of Meat by Carol Adams and have a quick flick through, but it was just like a little too specific in its approach to the material that's definitely exists in the DNA of this film. The objectification of bodies, the parallel associations of animal butchered meat and women's bodies in language, imagery, marketing. In a lot of ways, this film feels quite singular, which is partly to do with that France doesn't have a huge history of horror cinema. It sort of does, but it kind of doesn't. The orthodoxy of French critical film theory does not, or at least has not, recognized horror cinema until very recently. I was trying to find the reference, but I couldn't find it anywhere. But there was some massive encyclopedia of French cinema published in France. It was very well recognized. And when it got to talking about Georges Franju, just left Eyes Without a Face out completely, which is his most significant film now. It was still a pretty goddamn significant film at the time, but it was just like, oh no, this is not proper to talk about. That they would talk about the fantastique, things like La Belle La Bête and Georges Méliès and all those kinds of things, but it had to be this more poetic fantasy rather than horror. And going back and looking at it, there's like that scene that you talked about, the dinner scene. There's quite a few parts in this that do feel quite like Louis Buñuel films. That one is the one that definitely has the strongest connections with The Severed Hand to like Un Chien Andalou and to Exterminating Angel. But also I'm struck there's the Franju connection feels really significant, and it's not just Eyes Without a Face, because obviously that film is a woman in pieces who's lost her face and who's being experimented on by doctors to make her whole again, which is the first interaction she has with the doctor. The doctor offers to make her whole, to use plastic surgery to smooth over the wound, and she says, no thanks, I'm good.
I thought you were talking about Eyes Without the Face, because I almost said not just the doctor, but her father. But yeah, the doctor in this, he's one of those first encounters where it's just like, oh, don't you want to be pretty? The expectation is that your leg is a sex object.
Yeah, and ironically played by her brother in the film. But also to Franju's Blood of the Beasts, which is a documentary he made about the Paris abattoirs, and is an absolutely horrific and grueling experience. And so like that, it feels like Blood of the Beasts is very much part of the DNA of this film, of contrasting two sides of Parisian life. This sort of like the everyday normal world, and then this absolute horrific bloodbath that is occurring in a private sphere.
I would like to lodge a complaint that the Australian guy is doing very well at pronouncing things in French, and as the guy with the Midwestern accent, I don't like that because it does not set me up for success.
Okay, sorry, Axel. I'll try to be worse. These are the only ones that I can do properly, which is why I said them instead of the other. I can do. Oh, hang on, wait. Le Sans Visage. I should have done that because I can say that, and that's it.
I am a devout horror fan, and I would say that I am probably if I had to swear allegiances, I would swear my allegiance to horror before I swore it to film itself. And with that said, and I've thought about this, and I've watched this movie a couple of times. I do not think this is a horror film. I see this as a work of art, visual art, and I see it as a testimony to the triumph of her body. And to take something out of context, if you were to take the slogan, "Long live the new flesh," away from Cronenberg, repurpose it for this film, I think it would suit it really well, because this is a movie about her triumphantly reclaiming her flesh and, frankly, her ecstasy as she does so. I do feel compelled to say that self-harming behaviors are definitely something to talk about with a professional and to be concerned about without shaming anyone. But to me, this is a film that is demonstrating her thrills and a sensual joy, which gives me some thoughts about the ending that I'll hold off on. But I was not horrified by this film. I found myself watching the transformation.
One of my first notes was, it doesn't feel like a horror film to me. It feels pretty normal. And I will throw myself under that bus. I do think it is a horror film, though. I just don't think it's necessarily a body horror film, because I think that it's while there is some dichotomies presented, I think it collapses a lot of those. And I think that the reason why it is a horror film for me, and I don't find a joy in what's going on with her, is because of the collapsing of those elements. That if it was just a body horror film to me, I could probably be more in that position of like seeing what she's going through as a kind of revelatory positive. But because of how much of it is collapsed together with a social failure, and the mind-body split is a really sick delusion that we've been suffering under for centuries now. That is what causes a lot of what's going on from her, that it's so ingrained in us to have an experience of the two parts being separate, and that does some really fucked up things to us. And I do find it to be a horror film because it is about destabilization, and because there is a lot of failure around her, that it isn't threatening, but it's really not great. But it is very, very, very different to almost all the other horror films of its kind, to all the French new extremism, to the new French Extremity, I can say probably, and especially to feminist cannibal films, because she's not reacting to anything in particular. There's not a person or an entity or anything that symbolizes any kind of patriarchal law precisely. It's a real, in so many films, the cannibalistic act is devouring something else to like take its power and make it your own, to like gain this kind of independence, or to erase that which has been dominating you. But here it feels very real that it does feel much more like even at the same time as it's dealing with that horror stuff, it's dealing with it in a way that feels like a social realism, because it's just like, oh no, there isn't one thing that you can react against. There isn't a way to just devour it and be on with. There's no catharsis. It's just kind of a flailing around. And yeah, I think that she is. I'll have to find the quote. There was a quote about like that in the commentary about that this is a compulsion, and there isn't necessarily joy in it, but it isn't necessarily bad either. And it's so complicated in the way that she collapses those together that it isn't necessarily negative, but it isn't necessarily positive. But after watching all of her short films, I had a much more negative experience of In My Skin, because it feels like the culmination of a shit ton of pain. I highly recommend the shorts, but dear God, yeah, she had some shit to work out. But then the positive of that is I feel like she did work it out. Like In My Skin does feel like she exercises demons, and she has said in interviews that she never self-mutilated again after making the film, that she was able to release that and move on. So it's like, yeah, that's also really positive, but also, yuck.
A lot of what we're saying, there's a real strong overlap. I think what it comes down to is, there's an attempt at transformation, and what we're disagreeing on is whether or not she gets there. Because if she's always fractured and she doesn't achieve any kind of like a sublime moment, then I think it's a horror film. But if you believe that in this she finds something holy, and I believe that for her subjective narrative, she finds something of that meaning, and to me, that's what keeps it from being a horror film, is that it's about that trajectory. Now, in terms of her own biography, in terms of how you would, like clinically, if you were working with this person, there are all sorts of issues that would come up. But looking at it from her narrative, I find it interesting. And again, I see it as her finding something in this. But like I said, I think it's going to depend interpretively on whether or not people think she has beyond that fracture into something whole and new, or if she's never able to fully leave it behind, which being the film open to that kind of interpretation, I think makes it richer, and it gives you something to talk about after the movie's done.
The patriarchy for me is ever present, and I think that there is not necessarily one person that represents it in here. I think there's more like three, her boyfriend, her boss, and then her girlfriend. Her girlfriend, the pressures that happen between women at work is so awful. And the idea of you cannot get ahead, and we've seen this in 1,000 movies, 1,000 TV shows, you can't get ahead unless you push other people down. I can't break through that glass ceiling unless I'm stepping on your head. Like, those are awful, awful things. And the moment, talk about threes, the three men that attack our main character at the pool, and her friend is just sitting there. Everyone is just standing around. And meanwhile, I will consider this a rape is happening right in front of them with these three assholes that come out of the pool and want to throw her into the pool and try to start stripping her before they throw her in there. And they stop when they see the blood. And of course, to me, that is the whole women on their periods don't go swimming kind of thing. And it's like this horror of, I know it's not menstrual blood, but for me, these guys react as if it was, and just like, oh, we can't do this. And her POV shots after that happens, where she's looking around and it's like she's losing herself. And I love that it is a POV, that we are getting inside of her head, and we're going to get a lot more of that later on in the film. But it's not just one person holding her down. It's society. It's every single person she runs into. Even when she's at that party at the beginning, after she cuts her leg, there's that guy who's trying to dance way too closely to her. I mean, it's just a little moment, but you're like, okay, this is the same kind of stuff that she probably has to put up with every single day of her life being a woman. And she, has to put her hand on him, just like, nope, not today. And, move away from this guy, but he is such a lech. And at that point, her friend kind of helps her out, kind of moves her out of the way, which is nice. But her friend's not going to help her out too much more after that throughout the rest of this film.
It is 100% there in so many different ways. But it's like, I mean, if she turned around and ate her boyfriend in this, it wouldn't feel the same as if like in Trouble Every Day or something like that.
Oh God, I keep forgetting that I saw Trouble Every Day. That's another French Extremity film that I just could not stand.
I did not like it the first time. I wish I could find the essay I wrote on it years ago because I did come around to loving it. I really do appreciate Claire Denis a lot more now. But I think I wrote an essay on that and Baise-Moi together, both films I didn't care for until I wrote that essay and then came around to be like, oh yeah, no, actually I love these. That scene in the pool is intense. That is filmed in such a way that it comes off a lot more intensely than cinema generally treats an actual rape scene. And a big part of that is not even so much the action of the guys, it is the reaction of her friend and that failure of the bond and the way her friend just kind of lets her get pulled away and then kind of excuses it like, oh, I just froze. And it's like, no, we could see you thinking. You were thinking about what was happening. You felt weird about your friend, and so you let it happen instead of just getting in there and helping shut it down. And it feels like such a betrayal. And it's a betrayal that really cuts wide and deep if you feel it on the personal level and also on that societal, bigger picture level as well. That kind of is one of the many things that helps set Esther kind of even more adrift, that she starts to lose those connections more and more. And that is the failure to like have recognition, I think, is also part of the horror of this film. She doesn't necessarily need somebody else, but the lack of anything, that there isn't, that it's just that isolation and that loneliness. I don't know, in the commentary that Devan talks about that a bit, and how especially at the beginning she didn't want to shoot her like she was isolated because she didn't feel like she was. That a lot of the shots she's paired with somebody else, that she is in groups. And that when she goes off on her own, it's not because she is alone. It's her own curiosity that she's just someone who explores and moves around. And it's that sort of going off and curiosity is part of what helps set her adrift, because it breaks her loose of these people who don't want to explore, that aren't curious, that don't have actual empathy, that their empathy is built on pre-established structures of status quo and feeling and ideas, and that anything different and unusual is too much and too alien. And maybe they might be able to come around, but the reaction is so immediate and there isn't really any coming back for Esther once they react in a negative fashion. I was going down some weird rabbit holes of like thinking about ideas in relation to this kind of thing, of trying to pin it down. I found some fun stuff from like talking about Hobbes and Locke and what brings individuals together, and how like that essentially I got a great quote here from Maggie Kilgore from a book on communion to cannibalism, it's called, Ideas of Incorporation. And so the old image of the body politic created the sense of a world of essentially related members whose identities were determined and controlled by their social roles. With the rise of individualism, that body is also broken, its members scattered as atom-like individuals, so that society has to be remembered in a new way, with a new basis and foundation for relations. According to Hobbes and Locke, what brings equal individuals together is the desire to preserve the most essential human right, property. So you end up, with this fracturing and modernity where we all get split apart from our communities and we start to get isolated and become individuals, and how important that is and how that's held up as the absolute be all and end all, and the thing that holds us together is property, but women are made into property. And then it all starts, and this whole film just feels like a whole trajectory of the last 400 or 500 years just colliding into one individual person's just crash. Again, a crash that isn't entirely bad. We haven't even mentioned like that big A word yet, abject. But so much of this film is using these kind of abjections of like the boundaries, the transgression to melt the status quo, to melt the expectations. And I think like I'm real curious to see what people think of this film when it sort of reappears now with these new Blu-ray releases, because I think back in, was it 2007? What year did this come out again? 2002. Oh yeah, so even earlier. But back in 2002, even with things like the new French Extremity, so much of that was saying that it was dealing with things like misogyny and racism, but really just like riding them, real exploitation. This film just feels like a kind of film that is just like popping up on Tubi now, made by people in their backyards at home. Like the strange YouTube phenomena of like weird women getting their weird vibes and experiences out there. And again, I mean that positively. It's like I really wanted to try and watch Cannibal Mukbang before watching this, because I feel like Cannibal Mukbang must have some in my skin DNA somewhere in it for like a transgressive pushback against all that is proper and ordered.
You can put a cultural, a Marxist reading on this. You can, however, this is where I'm going to maybe have people disagree with me. I don't think that is the most useful reading, because I really do think this is a work of, was the term auto cinema or auto fiction? Auto fiction. This is, to me, putting the focus on patriarchy and culture and capitalism. You can get cogent results. You can have definitely an informed discussion about them. But to me, once you start putting your energy into those discussions, I really think it loses the focus and the power of one individual's story. And in this case, I think, and I'm going to go back to what I said, this is a story of a transformation. And I think the feelings we have on that are how we judge that kind of a transformation. Now, it informs the transformation that she has to have a patriarchy to rebel against to claim her body. We have to understand that first to be able to understand why she's doing this. But from there, to me, it becomes so very, very personal, body writing. There's a whole history of feminist literature and filmmaking based on this, where there are layers of experiencing more than just the narrative. And I found this as a film mostly an experience that I enjoyed it most when I was feeling her journey, and I enjoyed it least when I had that critical lens to say, well, her boyfriend is showing this and her best friend demonstrates this. I felt like as soon as that critical lens came up, it gave me a distance. It made me too comfortable, because it's like, oh, I get this. This is a movie with symbols and metaphors, and I can understand it that way. And I'm safe in my ivory academic tower. I think if you push those aside, you're face to face with this woman telling you a story about who she is, and your reactions to it become a part of the story. But as long as I have the talking stick for a little bit, I don't want to go too much further in the episode without talking about the party scene, which it might be my favorite part of the movie. And I'm going to give a little background as to why. She goes to the party with her friend. It does not look like a particularly awful party, but it looks incredibly boring. She goes out to walk, stumbles, falls, and cuts her leg. and it is completely anticlimactic. If you knew anything about this movie, you knew she was going to wound herself. The movie does not make that an event, does not highlight it. There's no close-ups. There's no shocking music. It just happens and it passes. The real magic for me is when she discovers the wound. She goes to the bathroom. She sees that she's tracked in blood. She looks at her leg and sees the wound. And then there's a close-up of her face, which I believe I'm paraphrasing John Cassavetes. Her face is the best special effect in the movie. There's a look of fear, maybe some disgust, and then, in my opinion, and this is central to kind of my thesis, there's this awe of, this is me. This is something that is happening. I have found something new within my own body. And here's where you can see some of the connections to the movie and book Crash, although they're not one-to-one equations, but the look on her face where she discovers her wound, to me, that facial expression explains more than any dialogue could.
If this was a different kind of movie, she would meet a tall, dark stranger at this party and begin an affair with that tall, dark stranger. And that would change the relationship with her best friend, with her boyfriend, with her work. But instead, the tall, dark stranger is her. It's like her meeting herself and her understanding or beginning to cope with this idea of the wound in her leg. And yeah, I can definitely see that Cronenbergian Crash Ballard type of thing, especially the Rosanna Arquette character with that big wound in her leg, which was just so freaking vaginal. And I mean, it's been a long time. I haven't seen Crash since I saw it originally at the theater. I mean, basically, isn't the sex with the wound rather than her vagina?
Yeah, that does happen in that film.
Okay.
And I know that in the commentary, Marina says that she very much didn't want to make it about sexuality, but when she talks about that, she does mean more that her compulsion isn't caused by sexual issues. That it's the boyfriend who's hung up on, oh, can you feel me, versus her. She's not. I do love that scene where she finds the wound initially, the way that we discover that she only becomes aware of it from the blood that she trails behind.
Well, the blood becomes like a tattletale through the whole movie. Like when she's at the restaurant later on and the waitress sees the blood. And at one point, there's the guy next to her, and I can't remember if that's like one of her, I think that's her boss. When he looks down, and I'm thinking, oh, there's going to be a whole bunch of blood there. But no, it's like a bag. I'm like, all right, because I thought for sure she would be trailing blood everywhere.
The blood trail also makes you feel like, if you think of if you've had some situation in a social circle where there's been a lot of emotional fallout and you don't necessarily notice that something bad has happened until you see the trail of destruction behind, which is something that happens in the film later on with her friend, of when she comes to confide in her, where she doesn't realize that this is a strange thing to be confiding, and that her friend reacting just like the blood is the thing that tells her that, oh, hang on, there's something not I didn't expect here. Hang on.
I love that scene where she goes to her friend and says, guess what I did? If I remember right, I went to the back room and I cut myself with something metal. And again, there's that transformative joy she is experiencing. And in that moment, she is trying to recruit another woman into this experience, saying, hey, this is something that you can experience too. And so there's a moment there where she's attempting to create a community based on the body. And again, I'm not saying that self-harm should be a transformative experience, although I believe Mike had said we're going to talk a little bit about performance art, so that'll muddy the waters. But she tries to create this shared experience based on the body, and ties to the abject and the things that that patriarchy isn't interested in, and she revolts and frightens her friend, who in a later scene can't even look at her.
I talked a bit before about how this film was received when it came out, and being curious about how it's received now. Is I love in the Severin release, there's an recent interview with Marina Devan, and she basically opens with her saying, "Look, I used to say it was all fictional, but now I'm tired and old and lazy and I can't be asked. So yeah, no, it's actually really heavily autobiographical," and talks about the self-mutilation and how much of that is like very truthful. That the piece of tanned skin we see in the film is of her real skin that she had tanned previous to the film. That she had eaten herself, but in a very different context. He says like she had it with champagne and, on a plate and like a civilized dinner, that it wasn't such a chaotic kind of thing like in the film. But at the time, I think what you were saying before about interpreting it, like I am riding both rails of personal experience interpretation and more critical academic kind of experience. I have a lot of connection to this film. I have my own share of scars. I have very antagonistic relationship with my body, which transformed quite significantly when I got my first tattoos. I remember sitting in the tattoo chair and looking at them doing this huge piece on my arm and having the realization that where previously I would not have cared if I was in some kind of accident and lost the arm, I was suddenly very attached to this arm. The tattoo itself made me connected to it. And that is something that this film is about, that Marina Devan talks about this in, I can't remember where, possibly in the same interview, of saying that like working on the body and creating the scars is a way of like shaping it into a way that is more you sometimes.
In the Faculty of Horror podcast on as well, Andrea Subasati said she is heavily tattooed, and in that process, there was a lot of self-reflection about what that meant for her and for her body. Alexandra West, at least at the time of that recording, no tattoos, no piercings. And so all of a sudden, I'm listening to that and I'm thinking about myself. And I'm 47, no tattoos, no piercings, and I'm continually thinking about getting a tattoo, but I never do it because of that permanent mark and that feeling of what's going to be meaningful enough. And then I feel like, on the other hand, well, but I'm missing out on this opportunity for, creating a narrative. So I don't know, maybe thinking about this movie and this conversation, maybe that'll push me one way or another. Mike, where are you at on tattoos and piercings?
Well, I can't get a tattoo because I want to be buried in a Jewish cemetery.
Just like Lenny Bruce.
Even though I'm not Jewish, but I just want to be buried there.
I am very much an anti-piercing person, not for other people, just for myself. Like, that kind of freaks me out, having holes punched in me, but like tattoos didn't bother me.
Just a lot of holes punched in you.
Yeah, it's different. It's superficial. But the two tattoos I have on each arm both have significant meaning to me and came about through the experience I went through with my father dying of cancer, and then the way that I found a path through that through Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy. And so I have all three book covers tattooed on my arms with the words annihilation on one and acceptance on the other. So it's they're very connected to trauma and to damage and loss. And it was a way of rebuilding myself and reconnecting. It was an odd side effect that I discovered a stronger connection to my own body than I previously had. I'm definitely very understanding of her experience in this film and very, very non-judgmental, even though it's like, chill out a bit.
I used to do a little bit of self-harm, not a lot, but yeah, we had, when we did the episode on Secretary, I remember we interviewed someone about cutting and just the idea of control and not having control in your own life, but having control over your own body. I mean, I see cutting being related to, eating disorders and this whole idea of just not having that control. And to me, the cutting that Marina Devon does in this movie feels very similar to that, as far as the idea of, I'm under all of this pressure from all of these other things, especially I would say the job definitely seems to play into that. And this is the way that I can control things. This is the only thing that I have control over, is the skin I live in, not to drop another film title.
Looping back again to the reception of it. But what I remember, the people who I watched it with back in when I first saw it, a lot of people were made uncomfortable by not knowing where to sit with the film as to whether it was autobiographical or symbolic. And that the lack of stability in their position at that time in history, with the way that we interpreted these kinds of feminist films, which were mostly only existing in the underground if they did exist, it made it a lot harder for people to just comfortably sit with it. That it was that they needed to know, they needed the position, they needed the judgment or something. Obviously, it's quite different now that she's come out and said, oh, it's very autobiographical. Obviously, the film still works hugely, brilliantly on a symbolic level as well. But it is, I think that was part of the problem of like how to approach it. Like it felt like only getting half of the conversation. And I think that's why it hasn't necessarily come into awareness as much, because there's films from 10 years after, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's films from 10 years, something like Trouble Every Day. Trouble Every Day is definitely much more in acceptance and understanding and general dialogue in relation to this kind of extreme feminist cinema than this film, and that comes out a year before, basically the same time. I'm glad that she's been able to come out and say that and to talk about her experiences, because I think it really does empower the film to land more firmly. It certainly doesn't make it any more black and white. This will never be a black and white film, but to be able to hold those two in your hands without having to do any kind of gymnastics or anything to figure it out or how you feel about it, to just be like, okay, this is happening and it is what it is. I think it will allow a lot more people to approach it more openly. And I think it is like a very positive experience, though I don't think it ends positively, Axel. I found that ending to be, I felt tired.
It's almost a true crime confessional, but replace crime with like social mores. This is a movie that it's telling you this is what happened. There's not a lot of ambiguity. There are no tricks. And that, by the way, I think makes it stand out from most of the new French extremities. It doesn't feel like it's tricky. It doesn't feel like there are, odd things happening here and there to spice it up, to get your attention. It's very, very focused and direct, and it's presenting this narrative and challenging you, like, to implicate yourself. How you respond to this movie is also going to be a reflection on who you are and how you got to that position. And it's hard to watch this movie, in my mind, and talk about it without exposing yourself. It's very challenging in that way. And it's, to me, the hardest parts of it to watch, it was less specific scenes. There are gross and gory scenes in this movie. She cuts herself. It's painful. But the toughest parts for me were just the stretches of the monotony, where I felt like her life was just moving and dragging on.
Some Jean Dalman in here.
The dinner scene, and I worked the second time specifically on this. I tried to pay attention to what the other people at the table were talking about, and I could not do it. Her real world is so just draining and bland.
I was climbing up the walls in that dinner scene. Like, it was.
I wanted to stab my arm.
Oh, it had nothing to do with what was going on with her and just everything else. It was just like, it was so uncomfortable and painful. Yeah, that scene is rough.
Here's what I noticed about the ending, and I'm probably stating something that's obvious, but she is either in her underwear or naked. I think she's in her underwear. And she's got the wound on her face, blood all over, and she's calling work to say that she'll be in tomorrow, but not today. And then she's calling her boyfriend. Side comment, I could not stand him.
I think you did a good job then.
There were some high-flying moments, but it was a realistic performance that made me want to slap him. But the last shot after she calls in and she's covered in blood is she's cleaned up. She is wearing her uniform, which is what I refer to as the black pantsuit that she wears throughout much of the film. She's laying on her side, staring straight forward. And me, it's like she tried to get out of all of these things. And in the last shot, she is still trapped in this boring, draining, soul-crushing world. You know, even though she hasn't left the hotel room yet. And I took it as that she isn't free in the very end, that she had a chance at it throughout this transgressive, problematic practice, but she didn't make it. And I'm curious what you two got out of that.
There was, where was it? I think it was in the interview on the disc that Marina talks about that wasn't originally planned as the final shot, that the final shot was meant to be her leaving the hotel, and that it was meant to be more optimistic kind of ending of her leaving that space and moving on. But it just didn't work. It didn't feel right. And so it ended up being that final shot, which she describes it as exactly as you did, that she's trapped, that she's stuck there, that she hasn't found a way out, that there is no solution here. And that's definitely how it felt to me, that it feels like a dead end that she's been backed into and nowhere else to turn to.
Psycho. And the way we pull out from her in this spiral pattern, like the water going down the drain. And you get that repeated 3 times as you're looking at her and her just staring at the camera. And that whole third act is so fourth wall breaking, which I guess would be 12 walls, I think, if it's a third act and there's a fourth wall break.
Fourth wall break inside a fourth wall break. That's like 16 walls.
It's just wild to see how often she's looking at the camera and how feral she looks. That's when, we're talking earlier about whether this is a horror film or not. There are horrific moments in that last bit when her hand comes around and grabs the bedpost and she comes out from behind it. She looks like a cannibal coming to eat you, and the way she's staring right at us, the audience. And she's got those great teeth. I mean, Marina Devon has a fantastic smile with those big teeth and that gap in between, and just looks like she's going to open up that mouth and just devour us. And that whole last part, I mean, I said earlier, we're going to talk about it, the way that we go from a regular, normal, no, not quite, but a narrative film into her having that breakdown where the world starts to get blurry for her. And we're seeing all of these POV shots, and then we go back to the split screen. And that whole thing of her being at a store, and it's wild to me because I was trying to really pay attention to the things that are at the store and the things that are being bought, because we could see the whole idea of what's being, scanned to pay for. Again, the whole consumerism and consuming things. And like, this is, again, her job is selling things to people, going back to Fight Club, to buy shit you don't need. Right. And I love that we get the multiple versions of these things, the camera, the Diet Coke or something, her with her credit card in her hand. And again, we start to go back to, we are starting to see the same images on both left and right side of the screen, but they're being shot from different angles. They're being fragmented in different ways. And again, this whole fragmentation, like we've seen her body literally fragmented. And then we start to see her being fragmented by the way that she's being shot. I mean, when, going back to one of my favorite professors, talking about the way that women are objectified on screen. She was a big Mulvey fan, turned me on to Mulvey, Modleski, these folks, and just the idea of showing different pieces and parts of a woman in order to take away their power and decentralize them, to destabilize them. I mean, I recently, not to jump too far over to the side, but I recently finally saw The Substance, and it was the strangest movie for me as far as a movie about the objectification of women that objectifies women to no end in sight. I mean, to just take poor Margaret Qualley and Demi Moore and just turn them into absolute sex objects throughout the entire film until maybe the third act. But it's just like, okay, this feels very counterintuitive. Whereas with this, having Marina Devon be in control and have her be the writer, the director, the actress, I feel like this is all very purposeful and all very look at what the cinema is doing, and her staring at us and that break of that wall showing us like, I know what the fuck I'm doing. I really felt so like she was being confrontational, and I was there for it.
We generally don't see her wounds when somebody else is looking at them. We do it when the doctor does, but generally in the film when like the boyfriend or friend or people are like trying to see them or witnessing them, she holds to a regular kind of dramatic two-shot backwards and forwards. There's no cutaway. There's no making the leg a spectacle of it. So it's only when she's alone with it that it becomes that it becomes something that she is in a relationship connected to, experiencing, witnessing, and we are shared in that experience. And it does keep it to the personal. And I think, again, like that, what you were saying about it being her, she being the actress, she being the writer, the director, that's part of that, the strength of, if I think back in 2002, that is a part of the destabilizing experience when it's just like that people make it, oh, well, it's, I can kind of react to this a bit more easily because it's her and it's not somebody else doing it to her. And then learning that it's autobiographical spins that even deeper and further. And that ending is so personal. You watch it a second time, it doesn't come out of nowhere, but it takes over the film. Like she has that, it's a freak out. Like she has, I've had a note written down somewhere from when she was talking about that, but I can't find it. But the way she describes it, it sounds like when you hear autistic people describing becoming overwhelmed and overloaded, that it's just everything is too much noise, too much objects, too much people, sound, like the look, the lights, the colors, and she just needs to retreat. She just needs to be essentially like self-stimming, do the thing that brings herself back into focus. It's just that final stage, she doesn't find a way back from it. I think there is a degree that the phone call with the work and such is there's something really hollow in that, because it's the connection to the outside world that she knows she can't really go back to. Like the way that she looks now, the way that she's damaged her face, she can't hide it, and there will be repercussions. So it's not that she feels shame, but there's an awareness that she's trapped herself here with the way that she has been coping with her inability to cope.
Yeah, and again, it puts it all on display of, how do you react to someone who is objectively attractive and has a good job and has a jerk boyfriend, but he checks off a lot of the boxes, her essentially erasing and rewriting that narrative for this other narrative. And, when she's not only is it a split screen, but if I remember right, the screen is split going pictures she has taken of her wounds. So it's like a copy of a copy. She is essentially editing herself like a film. She's cutting herself up literally and metaphorically and rearranging herself into this new narrative. And it's the new French Extremity. It's designed to push boundaries and make you react and make you implicate yourself. You could also take this into, like you were saying, if you could do this film with someone getting tattoos, and the further into the process they get, the more visible the tattoos become, until at some point they have a facial tattoo and it's changed their narrative in society. And I'm not equating tattoos and self-harm, but I am saying they're both ways of rewriting the body. I remember reading a long time ago a book called Sadomasochism in Everyday Life about the things that we do that harm ourselves that are not considered self-harm. And what if she had been an ultra long distance runner? That mark her body? Would that mark her identity and make it so she was not fitting into the narrative of what she was supposed to be?
Yeah, it's very much about the paradigms that are required of us and how we get forced into those and what is deemed acceptable and what isn't. Makes me think of a film I've been wanting to rewatch for so long, but don't know why it hasn't got a re-release. Sick, The Life and Death of Bob Flanagan, Super Masochist, a documentary from 1997. It was about a guy who used sadomasochistic practices in his performance art to help overcome his cystic fibrosis. And it's like, that's something where it's just like, oh, well, he would be dead if he didn't do these things that everybody otherwise would find super disturbing. It's the unified idea of what a person is and what a life is and how that crashes into the actual personal experience of how you survive is a narrative that is very complicated. But again, we come back to that the tension of how we live in a society of individuals, and yet we still have to make sure that we don't stick out in weird ways. It's what there's. I found one of the quotes I was looking for before, and this was from the interview on the DVD, the Blu-ray. That she said, "I think I mutilate myself to recover something that was not really mine, and that became mine. And also, when you mutilate heavily yourself, you have a lot of scars. It's as if you had drawn your own body and created that as a piece of art, because there is so many lines, figures, all that." And I did want to, I mentioned her short films before. I do want to come back around to them, because there's another quote shortly before that quote in the interview where she's talking about her childhood relationship with her parents, which was apparently very not good. She said, "I didn't feel that my body belonged to me, and the boundaries were constantly blurred. And I have felt that my parents allowed themselves to judge my body or speak of my body in a way that was transgressive and invasive and incestual. I think that is why I mutilate myself." And her first short film, Bien sus tu rapports, didn't get a chance to write down what the English translation was, sorry, is a very Chantal Ackerman-like, very kind of cold, straightforward drama about, she plays a young woman who brings a boyfriend home to her family. The brothers, mother and parents are all there. And she takes the boyfriend off and starts going down on him. And then the family comes in and the boyfriend freaks out and leaves. And then it turns out they have been recording it from the other room to show her how she's doing it wrong. And they go into the other room together and play back the video. There's graphic real sex of her going down on this guy, and watch it together, commentating on it and saying how badly she is doing it. It's a lot. The father says in this short, "Every social practice needs to be educated. You must follow rules, especially for violent pleasures, or else you would have a nice looking girl who, all of a sudden wallows like a cow and does things without precision, without beauty. Needless to say, this means a lot of work. And that was from 1996. She made that, the first short film. I highly recommend if you get a chance to watch the 4 shorts that she made before this. The next one, Retention, and then Sideshow and Alias. Such a continuity of ideas and an evolution. Her second film, Retention, is very much more traditional, transgressive piece with shit and, sitting on the toilet, going to the toilet, holding rosaries and eating shit and, living in filth and all this kind of thing. Very more weirdly traditional. Sideshow was like, people talk about Sideshow online and people like, this was really funny. And I'm like, I normally am the one who's laughing at the things everyone finds fucked, but Sideshow is this guy goes to the therapist and he's like sitting there lying on the couch and the therapist is like moves his chair slightly over and the guy rolls over and is like, you moved. He's like, no, I didn't. And he keeps doing that. And the guy's trying to talk about how he was just fired from his job because he didn't fit in. And he's talking about a lack of like connection with the people around him and how the way the work was more important than human connection. And this therapist keeps moving the chair more and more and saying, no, I don't know what you're talking about. It's such a head fuck. It was like, oh, this doesn't feel good. And then Alias is a young girl who it's her birthday and she's sad and disconnected from her family, and her family are having this party, like getting ready to show slides from her life. And she's crying and she's smoking and drinking. And then she gets up and leaves them looking at the slides. And she swaps clothes with their house cleaner. And the house cleaner goes and sits down and the party just continues. And they give her the gifts as if she's the daughter. And I was like, all 4 of these together was just like this horror of alignment. Like either not enough alignment or too much alignment of these roles that you have to play, of the boundaries and borders that should be there melting. And just like the whole thing, it was like they were all about like 10 to 16 minutes each. So it's like all 4 together is like almost a whole film. And watching all 4 of those and then watching In My Skin is just an incredible emotional head trip. I only got a chance to watch one of her other films. I watched the Irish film that she made recently, Dark Touch. And I wish that I had a chance to watch that again after watching her shorts, because that is a really intense film about childhood abuse, but done with a narrative that's like Carrie. And I watched that like earlier in this week before I'd come back around and watched In My Skin again, and it was a lot. I was very impressed by it. It was very definitely had the same kind of feeling that In My Skin has, of just telling a personal story that feels like it comes from the source, that it's not secondary. And I'm definitely going to go back and revisit Dark Touch after watching the shorts and In My Skin again, because I think she's a really, really tremendous filmmaker. I think she has a way of just like hitting these notes that a lot of people else either just feels like they're telling a story or it feels like exploitation. And instead it just like, I felt like I was putting my hand in the fire, and it's a lot in a great way. But oh man, watch those shorts. Like when you go back and look at the stuff that, like, as she talks about her family and that lack of boundaries and borders, the way that like she felt transgressed on. And then you look at In My Skin and the way she talks about how this was the way of taking her body back and her life back. And then ultimately the film ends up being a positive experience because it's her way of restoring that, something that the self-mutilation, like, ideally wasn't giving her. Like, it was a coping mechanism, but it wasn't giving her the step to get out. And in making the film, she got that. And they're beautiful, incredible films, but not for a sunny day.
Well, it's interesting that the family is not part of this film, that there is no family when it comes to this, other than her literal brother who's playing the doctor character. We've actually talked about her a little bit before when we did an episode on Visitor Q, and we talked about, what's the name of that? The Pasolini film. Is it Tintorera? Where the Terrence Stamp?
Theorem.
Thank you. When he comes in, R.I.P. Terrence Stamp. And we also talked about Sitcom on that, which is the Francois Ozon, I believe is how you say it. And she worked with him a lot as both an actress as well as a collaborator. She has credits for, The 8 Women. And there's another one that he worked on that she gets some screenwriting credit on as well. I don't know what their relationship is, if it's more mentor-student or collaborator, but just to have those two together, very similar sensibilities. And I definitely saw a lot of interesting things, especially, I mean, sitcom really, when I did sit down and watch Bien Surtout Rapport, which I think translates to good in all things or good in all respects, that just felt so sitcom to me. And I think it was before sitcom. So it was pretty wild to see that stuff. To go back to the idea of, your body not being your own, it's funny because there was just a story on NPR maybe 2 days ago talking about a study around limbs that are missing, and the whole idea of when the brain knows or doesn't know that your limb is missing. And there was an interview with a woman where she had lost her arm 3 years ago, and the brain still thinks that it's there. And then you compare that to something like, there's a really amazing documentary called Whole, WHOLE, from 2004 by Melody Gilbert, which is all about body integrity identity disorder, which is when you feel this limb does not belong to me. This whole dichotomy of my limb's still here versus this limb isn't mine. And people who go to these extremes to remove their own limbs. I think we talked about that a little bit when we discussed Boxing Helena. And yeah, that was really wild to talk about. And then you were talking about the Bob Flanagan documentary. There's also, I don't think it's just called Suspension, but there's a great documentary about people who are into suspension and how that pain, discomfort is so freeing. And I know that things like shibari is usually treated like a very therapeutic thing, where even by being tied up in these different positions, you feel like you're more free than you are normally, that you feel like you are in a different headspace, again, head space rather than body space, but the body affects the brain. And I so agree with you, Ben, as far as this whole dichotomy of brain body just should not be a dichotomy at all. It really should be all one whole thing, but we treat it like that. And even Marina Devon talking about how, as a person, you don't see yourself unless you're looking in a mirror or being on film. You don't see your face. You don't see certain parts of your body. You are not looking at yourself at all times. And we were talking about the fragmentation, or I was talking about the fragmentation of the body. And there's a moment in that third act where you go from all of these fragments of her and her, sucking on herself, biting herself, feasting on herself. And then boom, you cut to a shot where it is her whole body from head to toe. And it feels like that's the moment for me, that catharsis that this film brings to her. I know there's a little bit of disagreement between the three of us if there is a catharsis. But for me, it's like when you see her all back together, then it's like, okay, I think she's in a better place. But yeah, to your point, as far as does she ever leave the hotel room? I don't know if she does. And I love that it's a hotel room, because I was talking about how this whole thing feels like she's met the tall, dark stranger that is herself, that she rents this hotel room, or it seems like many hotel rooms, to have this illicit affair with herself.
Yeah, and also the scene where she fakes a car accident feels like she's been out on a date and needs to make up like an excuse for the time and the wounds. It's a great scene with her trying to explain. It's the most animated she is in the entire film, I think. Like she's sort of babbling away, so with the reasons and excuses, and it feels so unnatural to how we've experienced her.
So this came out in 2002. That puts it before a lot of the emphasis on trauma and how trauma affects the body, and things like the polyvagal nerve, and a different and more thorough look at PTSD. So in a way, this film really anticipates where we're at now. And you could almost argue that this movie might find a more receptive audience now than when it was released, that it's saying things that now we're more prepared to talk about. Another element of, self-harm is that it marks the outside of your body things the inside of your body might be feeling. So, if you come from a dysfunctional family where, you are being traumatized, you may not look traumatized. From the outside, put you in a row of kids the same age and you look exactly the same, but you feel all of these feelings. You don't feel like the other kids. So I think sometimes part of that self-harm is marking, I am hurting, this is my experience, I am different. And I can definitely see that applying to Esther in this movie, of she is suffering these invisible wounds with her boyfriend, her job, the lack of a connection with her friend. And as she is marking herself, she is setting herself up as different.
Yeah, they certainly, especially experience, we're hearing so much now of testimonies from women about their experiences with the medical industry, with doctors disbelieving the pain that they're in, they're disbelieving their personal testimonies. And, the self-harming is a way of making that manifest, of taking it away from being just in your head to, oh, look, no, this is a real thing. And I don't think a medical professional not going to see it and listen to it like that way, but that can be soothing, definitely.
This is very definitely a movie about a woman, definitely a feminist lens, to be able to fully appreciate the nuances and what's going on. That said, there are men who self-harm. It would be a different movie to take this from a masculine perspective. And not to take anything away from this movie, I would be curious what that movie would look like and how that would be different, because I don't think it's apples to apples. It would be a very different film. And yeah, it just was something that made me curious when I was watching this.
Well, some men self-harm by picking fights and getting other people to harm them, or being injured in fights. One real quick scene that I want to talk about as we start to wrap up this discussion is the moment when she wakes up and her arm is asleep, and she's just kind of flopping her arm around and just, kind of exploring this. And it's the same arm, of course, that is going to be disembodied later on during the dinner scene. And her boyfriend comes up, he's behind her, and I think she's enjoying this sensation of, what is this arm that I have? Feels again very disassociated. And of course, he has to solve a problem. So many men just see a problem, they want to solve a problem, just don't bother me kind of thing. And he just takes her hand and starts to massage her arm and tries to get the blood flowing again. And he's just like, yeah, there you go, easy peasy. And it's like, no, she actually didn't want help at the moment, dude. Like, you really need to back off. And his whole thing is, it feels like she is a problem to solve. And I did really appreciate what Alexandra Heller-Nicholas said in her video essay about this, on the, I can't remember which release that was, but great essay. She really, again, talks about those opening credits. And then the video editor of that does a great job too. Will pull in other moments of the film where there are split screens that aren't split screens, but the way that things are filmed, like there's shots of those office buildings where in that business district where Esther works at, our main character works at, and the screen will be split down the middle with a building on one side and then more of a scenic view on the other side. And I think then you contradict that with another one where the building's on the other side, and then you have more of a vision on the opposite side of the screen. And she talks about in that how I think the boyfriend reacts so violently against Esther's self-harming because of his own anxiety, his castration anxiety, and just like, how can you hurt yourself? How dare you defile that temple? You know, like so many men. I mean, men will fucking freak out if a woman gets a fucking haircut. I mean, it's wild that they are so, and I say they because I don't count myself in with this at all, but some men really freak out if a woman has that autonomy over herself to make her own choice when it comes to how she wears her hair. Good Lord. Let's all just have a panic attack, everybody.
Yeah, it's very clear that the only way that he has into understanding her experience is how it affects him. That everything when he talks about it, it's all in relation to him in some way, either in like a high key or low key way. That he isn't able to like grasp the independence of her experience. Part of that is definitely because of the association with self-harm being connected to suicide. And so there is like, that is a big, death is a big chasm. Like that makes people leap backwards suddenly. And in 2002, I'm not saying we really got a better understanding of these kind of tendencies now, but there's a lot more, not as narrow of an experience people have had with these kind of self-harming and such. So I think it's to a degree there, people's reactions in this is understandable if you do keep that in mind. We aren't looking at it with a more modern lens, with better understandings of psychology and mental health and diverse experiences. These people are reacting to someone who they are seeing as suicidal. Like that's most likely the way that they are interpreting it, that they're saying like, well, if she's not suicidal now, it's only a few steps till, because that's when people hurt themselves, is when they want to die. And, you know, in some ways that ties it back around to the abject and how, you know, the ultimate abject object is a corpse. And so they are almost imagining her as a corpse in their mind walking around. And that's, you know, is entirely on them. There is a different experience of human connection in this film that we haven't talked about, and that's the pharmacist, which is a great scene where there's no, like, it is a bananas conversation where there's so much like, you feel like the pharmacist should be maybe asking a couple of extra questions when she comes to him to ask how to preserve a piece of her own skin, and her answers aren't quite stacking up and he's not quite putting it together. But also it's great that he doesn't put it together to be concerned, because it's these two people who are curious meeting in their curiosity. And there's a beautiful little scene of these strange little like bonding between these two as they discuss the hows of like how to preserve something and this shared interest. And it's like, it is actually like probably the most kind of like, that's the scene that made me happiest. I enjoyed those two little weirdos having their weird conversation.
It's very childlike, and there is a childlikeness to a lot of these very serious things. And at that moment when she's talking to the pharmacist, his first reaction is also a childlike wonder of, yeah, how would you do that? And oh, it would be like this. And it's this playful moment. And then as the scene progresses, he starts to catch that this is going further than just an idea. And you can see him retreat from being playful. But I think one of the ways that we experience the abject and we experience things outside of norm, you know, is that kids will play with that, and they will find ways of interacting with that, get to know it better. And, you know, then as we're socialized, we're taught that certain things are taboo, especially your body, blood. And for her to go back and almost regress it's a transgression. I wanted to add in talking about Vincent, the boyfriend, I think one of the most telling scenes for him is he is furious she is crying on the street because he worries people might judge job as a boyfriend. So her crying, the problem is it makes him look bad.
Yeah, he's a typical emotional male. To come full circle, I think we already do have this film as about a man, and it is Fight Club.
I can see that. I mean, we've made several references.
It's just him on his own in his personal, with his tall, dark stranger having his exploring his body.
And I believe that Marla even makes a reference to a tall, dark stranger in that film.
Condom is the glass slipper of our generation. You slip one on when you meet a stranger. You dance all night. Then you throw it away. The condom, I mean, not the stranger.
I would add to Fight Club, the early works aren't written than filmic, but some of Bret Easton Ellis's stuff, like Less Than Zero, American Psycho, have that same transgressive, I kind of want to be an object and let things happen to me vibe to them. They're not the same, but I felt like they would be interesting to compare to one another.
Yeah, there's a lot more of a transgressive art in this than there is a horror art DNA. Like, it's definitely owes more to that art transgressive background, the literature and films and such, the films of the underground. And I said, like, the short films definitely connect those dots a lot more as well. Chantal Ackerman we mentioned a couple of times for.
Axel, you glommed onto the idea of the performance art. And yeah, I wanted to touch on that very quickly. So much performance art falls into this whole idea of the body and how do we treat our own bodies? How do we use our bodies as this canvas, sometimes a literal canvas? And I know we'll talk a little bit more next week when we discuss Raw as far as the painting of the body. But even thinking about that, I'm thinking about like Karen Finley and how she would cover herself in chocolate pudding, and just basically it would mimic shit, and just the way that she would be almost naked up on stage, but just covered with chocolate pudding. And I'm trying to remember, there was a performance artist that we had at NoirCon years and years ago, and Lou Boxer's got an interesting range when it comes to what he considers noir art. And this performance artist, she did this amazing stuff where she had a whole lot of pig skin and took all of this pig skin and stapled it to a house and had this shack, this almost reminds me of those pictures that you see of Ted Kaczynski's shack, like where they have it at like FBI headquarters or whatever, and they're still studying his shack or whatever. But it was like shack like that, covered in pigskin, and she would invite people to come inside the shack and smell what it smells like, feel what it feels like, touch that skin, which, if you don't know, pigskin feels so much like human flesh. And to touch that, I mean, when they talk about cannibals, and I'm sure you can attest to this one, Ben, the whole idea of long pig, right? Like humans are just longer pigs. And yeah, people going in there and touching these things. She also made these beautiful, beautiful flowers live in front of us on stage, and she used duck tongues. And those kind of curl over, very different than a duck's cock, which is more like a corkscrew, but duck tongue kind of curls over and it becomes the petals of these flowers that she was making. Really fucked up, but really fascinating at the same time.
The artist's name is Haida Hatry, Heidehatry.
Spent some time working in fetish goth clubs and got my fair share of...
When didn't we all do that?
Definitely seen some things shoved through human male genitalia in my time. A lot of this film, it's definitely, I don't find it particularly shocking. It was, as I said, the main scene that had me climbing up the wall was the dinner party scene, and it was more the social aspect, but it was also the ADHD intrusive thought part that it really tickled memories for me of those moments where you're like, wait, am I doing this? Is this happening? Wait, no, I'm just thinking this. No, I didn't just say that, did I? Did I think it? That section captures that so well. And it feels like performance art in that it does feel like an embodied projection of an experience, that I don't feel like I'm sitting there watching a narrative or another person. Like, you're really feeling the experience, which is, what performance art aims for a lot of the time. Yeah, I really hope Marina Devan gets a chance to do more films.
With the dinner scene, I might be reading too much into this, but I found it interesting that when she goes down into the wine cellar to continue cutting her arm, and she drops the knife, it's another woman that finds it and has this reaction to it, and it becomes concerned. When I saw that, part of me thought, maybe there's something to that, is that it takes another woman to be able to really see her, as opposed to the people at the table understand that she's off, but don't really see where she's at. I thought that was an interesting little moment.
Yeah, it's also the flip side of interpretation that is that it's a very ordered space, and a knife is a very threatening object, and such an object in an ordered space is a red flag. But yes, I definitely think that a woman is probably, having worked in customer service in places where there are knives, a woman is more likely to notice that than a guy. Yes. How many cannibal books do I have within reach of me right now? We barely even talked about cannibalism. Admittedly, though, like, the cannibal stuff was kind of hard to come at, and I had to like jump through a lot of hoops. But it's sort of the cannibal thing was more that it was thinking about rituals and thinking about cinema as ritual, and how the Marina Devan's films do, like, they really feel like she's harnessing the language of cinema and communicating to us, and we are coming to perform the ritual of experiencing it and incorporating her experience into ourselves like an act of cannibalism. Like, that definitely feels like an appropriate way to describe the experience of her films. Like, they're meaty and chewing on them, and you feel like the transgression of it, but also like the power of it, that you feel like you're restoring something in yourself, that you're gaining energy from it and meaning, that they don't feel like hollow capitalistic experiences. They don't feel like a Big Mac, that they're really tangible, and that they exist to give you some kind of restorative meaning, balance, function, whatever, to like bridge a divide that nobody else is necessarily trying to bridge, which is, the cannibalism. Even with, it's not a film that should really use the word cannibal, because that does tie more into colonialism and defining an other in order to lessen them, whereas this is really like anthropophagy, which is the ritual act of taking in the flesh of a human, which in most ritual tribal societies is restorative. It is positive. The connection to long pig and such, that, there were societies that stopped sacrificing humans and started sacrificing pigs as well, which is also, there's all sorts of crisscross mix up things. And yeah, this film, in a way, it does feel like a bit of a sacrifice, that she's kind of sacrificing part of herself to give to the world. And and I think that is part of why it ultimately ends up feeling like a beautiful experience, as difficult and confronting as it is.
I agree with you that I can't remember who said it earlier as far as what would happen if she ate her boyfriend. And there's the moment, I think it's about 17 minutes in, when they have sex and they're kissing, and she is definitely doing some play biting at him when it comes to that. And what a different movie it would be if she were to eat her boyfriend, as opposed to this self-cannibalism, this idea of her being so in touch with herself, because it just wouldn't make sense at all if she were to eat somebody else, because this is so much about her getting in touch with her body and experiencing her body, and just fuck everybody else. I mean, everybody else in this movie does not support her nearly as much as she needs. and really can't, I don't think. I think she has to go on this journey herself with no one else along as this kind of guidepost. And like you guys mentioned, she tries to bring it up to other people. They are either horrified or don't care. And other than maybe that pharmacist who, kind of a little creep who I really appreciate.
You're imagining it with that change of her eating the boyfriend, and that kind of brings me back to The Substance, which is not that scenario. To me, The Substance is taking ideas like this movie has and then pasting meaning in a really obvious way that it hands to you, so you can watch it and you can say to yourself, hey, I watched a movie with subtext, but it's really not subtext. It's pretty clear. That makes this more than a horror movie, so we can go ahead and applaud it because someone already told us what it means.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
This is a movie that exists and asks you to interact with it. It requires more from the audience, less passivity, and that's the difference between art and a movie that I didn't find very remarkable.
Literally put big words across the screen to tell you sometimes what's happening.
I quite enjoyed The Substance, but I also saw it on a big screen in a ratty old cinema with a middle-aged woman up the back who kept having coughing fits. She was laughing so much. So it was kind of the perfect way to see it. And I think the big difference for me between The Substance and In My Skin is The Substance is an aggressive film. The Substance wants to assault the audience, which you definitely get if you see it on the big screen because it's so loud and so just like, it's just Window Liquor, the gore film. It's Window Liquor and Come to Daddy crammed together into like a feminist French film. Whereas In My Skin is not that. If In My Skin doesn't want to attack its audience, it's actually really holding back from freaking you out as much as possible. I think I am coming around more to saying that In My Skin isn't a horror film. I think I'm coming around to your side there, Axel. I also think that the term, the new French extremity, is a completely useless term. I saw in one of the readings this cinema du corps, or cinema of the body, is suggested by Tim Palmer, which connects back to the cinema de look of the 80s and 90s, and thinking how The Substance is basically fusing a cinema of the body and a cinema of the look together. And someone really needs to come up with a better term, because I do think that I think that In My Skin is part of an extreme movement in French cinema that is about reclaiming a lot of different things that are connected to horror, that are connected to transgressiveness, that brings in, we haven't even mentioned Catherine Breillat at all here.
I'm so glad for that.
Of all the things in the French new extremity, she's probably the one that this film has the most in common with like Fat Girl and such. There definitely was something interesting going on. But as I said, like the French cinema is so disrespectful to horror and so disregarding of it that to simply like slap it all together as one whole, it really undermines something like this film, which is a lot more than what was this? Borders? What was that one with like the French Nazis torturing people?
Frontiers.
Yeah.
Frontiers.
Borders, Frontiers, close enough. I mean, Borders, Barnes and Noble, close enough.
To have like an umbrella term that includes that film and this film really illustrates that it's not a helpful term.
I think it works better if you think about it almost like Old Testament, New Testament. Because from what I read, there's the first part, the beginning stages of the new French extremity were extreme art house films, but were at their heart art house and independent, but transgressive. And then next sort of level of that is when horror-minded people realized, hey, we can make explicit horror films with a splash of art house, and that would work, and we can get them into, we can get them playing in different theaters than we could otherwise. There's a yin-yang thing going on there. This is definitely an art house film with horror elements, whereas I only saw Frontiers once a long time ago. To me, it was, someone added arty elements to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and put it in France. Although the original, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, has enough arty elements of its own that don't get enough credit sometimes.
There's something interesting, really something interesting there, because I haven't seen Martyrs since it came out either, but that feels like a kind of linchpin between the two somewhat. But then, we mentioned Gaspar Noé, and it's like, Climax feels like it has more in common with In My Skin than any of his earlier films. I think Climax is the best is far better than his earlier works because it has a bit more of the personal and the empathetic and understanding that something like In My Skin has. It feels like a film made by a small group of people in a short amount of time who, instead of thinking about it, presented themselves.
Into the Void, I would maybe put there too, as one that does have a little bit more empathy and more range of motion than like I Stand Alone, or Irreversible is just a mean, angry critter.
Yeah, I thought of Irreversible when I was coming back around and watching this again the second time this week, because both films involve women going off into like dark, isolated places and having a bodily crappy experience, and the outcomes from each of them are very different. Which I don't feel that wasn't a line of thought that really went anywhere, but it says a lot about how different this film is to that film, that spirals out into guys freaking out and destroying everything and us having to sit through a woman having a horrific experience, whereas this one is so much more complicated than that.
All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages. Looking for something superior to streaming? A place with more than 5 times the selection available on all streaming services combined? Check out Scarecrow Video's Rent by Mail service. Select from an unparalleled collection of over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Get in on it now at scarecrow.com and rediscover the wonders of physical media. That's right, we'll be back next week with a look at Raw, a great companion piece to In My Skin. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts Axel and Ben. So Ben, what is the latest with you, sir?
Not a huge amount these days, still just plugging away in the TV post-production world. You can find me on Letterboxd as Dissolved Pet, where I have an absolutely huge list of all the cannibal-related films that I've ever been able to find. And you can also find me on Blue Sky at Dissolved Pet, where I really should talk about cannibalism more.
And Axel, how about yourself?
Still threatening to do my own podcast. I keep coming up with ideas. I even started writing a script. So it's taking about as long as it took Guns N' Roses to put out Chinese Democracy. But there's always the threat that I will create a podcast at some point. And then working on starting up some writing in November. I've got kind of a nonfiction mental health book I've been tooling around with, so I might go and do another wash at that. And then just hanging out and slowly finding age-appropriate horror movies for my daughter, who, you'll be happy to know, picked a book about the Donner Party to read the other day.
Gotta get more kids into cannibalism, yeah.
So you're going to watch Cannibal the Musical after she's done with that?
I don't remember if that one's... Because I always have to think, two questions. Is there going to be something sexually explicit I don't want to explain? And is there going to be a moment where she will wake up in the middle of the night and wake my wife up because she's scared? Because then that comes back to me.
I mean, there's the bit with the ogre guy and he has the eye poking out. That's probably the gnarliest bit, and because he's like, and he's big and scary. I think all the sexual stuff is like very Mormon sexual. So it's all like,
it's more about the love between a man and his horse, if memory serves.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, but that's, that'll just go. I'm just sitting there and like, I was watching that when I was 13, 14. So, but that you shouldn't take that into account because I was watching way more fucked up stuff than that at that age.
Thank you again, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Do you want to support physical media and get great movies in the mail? Head over to scarecrow.com and try Scarecrow Video's incredible rent-by-mail service, the largest publicly accessible collection in the world. You'll find films there entirely unavailable elsewhere. Get what you want when you want it without the scrolling. And of course, In My Skin is available for rent. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.